Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, Lore and Fray, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. So, overnight, we received some new information regarding Nintendo Switch, in that it sold over 122 million units. I believe that means it's outsold the PS4. No big accomplishment there. But it also proves that the Nintendo Switch is still going very, very, very strong, and that Nintendo is doing very well for themselves. However, like every single financial report, we have to have someone try and ruin this. Someone try to spin this as being a bad thing for Nintendo. And right now, going off the very early kind of reception to this, I'm seeing investors trying to claim that Nintendo missed their mark, that the Switch is slowing down, and that they need to announce a replacement pronto. Otherwise, that Nintendo risks going out of business. Now, this is no different than the typical game journalism gloom and doom regarding the company. In fact, I would say it's the exact same thing, being pushed for the exact same reason. The investors are releasing these statements about Nintendo in order to protect their own interest in Sony and Microsoft, right? They really don't want it publicly known that Nintendo is dominating the competition right now. There's all these theories as to why they do this, but basically it goes against their shareholders' interests, really, to tell it how it is and say that yeah, Nintendo has won the console war and Sony and Microsoft are obviously both on the way out. Nobody really wants to admit that. And even now, in the twilight days of PlayStation and Xbox, we're still getting these weird biased takes from these people. Specifically, this idea that, I've seen analysts put out in the recent past, that the PS5 is the market leader this generation, which is laughably dumb if you've been paying attention at all to what's been going on in the sphere. The third parties that have traditionally kept PlayStation relevant, big in mainstream circles have been crumbling. Final Fantasy, Metal Gear, COD even, all of it is falling by the wayside, while Nintendo's big name IPs are doing better than ever. We are seriously claiming that Nintendo selling 50 million units of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is on the way out. Are you serious? Are you seriously pretending as if this is an underwhelming accomplishment? We're past the point where you can reasonably say that oh, Nintendo, their platform doesn't have any games. Bro. There are decades worth of great games available on Nintendo Switch right now, right? You can pick up obscure PS2 classics. You can get a Nintendo Switch Online membership and get play all of the old, classic old Nintendo stuff. You have re-releases of stuff from the Wii and GameCube era, right? This idea that the Switch is ever going to lose steam is honestly kind of laughable, at this stage, considering just how well the console has done up to this point. This idea that the platform is losing momentum, it's entirely a narrative pushed by the gaming industry, trying to meme this into reality. It's not an observation of how the market actually feels about Nintendo. It's a group of investors trying to convince people that the Switch is not worth picking up because they would rather PlayStation and Xbox succeed instead. That's kind of what we're seeing here. Again, I'm reminded very strongly of how the 3DS was supposed to be put out the pasture in 2017, right? When it continued being released until 2019. There were new games being released for quite a long while after the Switch launched. And these people, even now, the 3DS is still selling units. Even now, people are still playing 3DS or OG DS, original Wii games, GameCube, retro consoles in general. This idea that the Switch is just going to die and immediately be replaced by a new console is just laughable. It's just not going to play out that way. And I think Nintendo knows that. I've kind of gone on record before that I actually do think the assumption that a lot of people are making about the 6-year console cycle are dreadfully off kilter, considering what President Fukushima, not Fukushima, what was his name? The guy that immediately replaced Iwata, that was like replaced by Fukushima, that guy, like one of the first things he really came out and said about the Switch is that like this is a platform we plan on supporting for a long time. And I can see why he said that. 6 years is not a long time. There is no point in replacing the Switch at this phase because they still have a lot of they still have a lot of consumers to reach. They're still selling a ton of software. There's been no real notable upgrade in technology. There is no reason to significantly to release a new piece of hardware. Much like the Game Boy back in 1989, like the Game Boy technically existed until 2001, right? It was an extremely long-lasting platform, in part because of its popularity, but in part because, it was for like that solid decade, over a decade, it was like an indispensable part of the console industry. Entire new franchises were born from that thing. Like Pokemon is now the biggest brand in the world, and it came from the Game Boy, right? The idea that like Switch is going to get a new platform just like to compete with the PlayStation and Xbox, like consoles that it's still to this day dominating, it's not only laughable, it's just plain stupid, honestly. Like again, I am just, if this was coming from Michael Pachter, okay, if like you had the same exact statements coming from like Michael Pachter, a analyst that fans have learned over the years to like not trust and to like straight up make fun of for his woefully incorrect predictions about Nintendo and what they should do, this would be seen as just a downright ridiculous statement. And it really is that terrible. Okay. It really is just a bunch of like pencil pushers who know nothing about the video game industry and like how people play and experience games and are just more interested in like this idea, this myth that Nintendo is soon going to die and be replaced by like the hot new thing. 10 years ago it was mobile. Remember when like 10 years ago mobile was supposed to kill Nintendo, and now 10 years later, we have this like Nintendo's dominating the entire console industry, even though nobody wants to admit it, right? If anything, Nintendo's dominating mobile, on mobile platforms, considering the sheer strength of their IP. Like, does anybody remember Pokemon Go? Like, it's not going to be too much longer until like we start getting like regular releases of like recognizable Nintendo IPs that get like really high quality like mobile games that like just dominate that app store. Like the days of like companies like Rovio putting out Angry Birds and like pretending that like it's gonna like making statements about how it's going to be the next Mario. Like it's not going to happen. Like never again. You know, the big app store games are going to be like brands and uh, uh, are going to be brands and titles that like people recognize. It's gonna be like more like Pokemon. It's gonna be more like Fire Emblem Heroes. It's gonna be like stuff that people actually have some kind of attachment to, right? Mobile is not like the big wild west of the gaming world anymore. It's not going to replace Nintendo. PlayStation and Xbox can't compete. I would argue they've never competed with Nintendo. Two of the biggest corporations on the planet could not stomp out this tiny Japanese company. And to that, like that's something that like I think Nintendo should be very proud of, and I'm sure they are. This is we've been seeing these kind of like weird attacks on Nintendo really since the Sega Genesis launched, maybe earlier, but well, it's really interesting to see just like how the lies and the narrative like keeps getting pushed, even in like this wake of like really good positive news regarding the company.